Okay. What are some problems, both domestic and international, that we face when providing foreign aid to another country?
It's a good question. I mean, there could be lots of problems associated with it. I think the first one, in terms of the state that's receiving it, their population might be under the impression that they're receiving foreign aid that's primarily humanitarian, when in reality, bigger chunk of the foreign aid that the United States provides to states around the world consists of military assistance. And so that's not, people both in our population and in populations around the world often think foreign aid that must be, humanitarian aid. And humanitarian is often just a small percentage of this. So the drawback is that it creates expectations that might not be met. If you think about our support for Egypt, for example, that's been in the news a lot because of the changes, brought about by the onset of the Arab Springs, and then especially lately when President Morsi had been ousted, and we were asking ourselves, should we continue our relationship, which resulted in us giving a lot of foreign aid to Egypt, and we've been doing this for decades, since the late 1970s. And so our question was, should we continue doing this when they've engaged in this change in government that's less than democratic, to put it mildly? And we continued it because there were greater, and there are greater strategic considerations. So the drawback is it goes against democratic expectations, both maybe of our population and of the receiving population. But then there are other problems. Sometimes when we engage in foreign aid, it is tied to domestic interests. So it's not just tied to our strategic concerns, it is also often tied to domestic interests. So if we're thinking about even the delivery of something like food aid, so now we're, never mind the military assistance that we might give as part of foreign aid. If we're just thinking about food aid, often the aid consists of us promising food, but the food has to come from the US. And so we're helping our farmers sell produce, so that's good for our farmers, but it can mess with local economies, right? And so that's where it can be very problematic. Plus, it might actually mess with our own domestic economy because it sort of props up certain agricultural sectors, or right now, for example, USAID, the agency, the part of the State Department that deals with foreign aid, they've been thinking about how they could make themselves more effective and how they could take into consideration some of these problems. And so they're trying to say we should buy more locally, and we should maybe provide money rather than actual food. But they've come up against those domestic interests, and they've come up very strongly against the shipping industry, right? I mean, this is sort of where you might think it's about helping people somewhere else, when very often the deciding factors are helping our domestic constituencies. So I think those are just some I can think of.
Okay, and you gave some pretty specific examples, and the next question was give a few specific examples. So, I guess...
Well, just one additional, Egypt often gets mentioned as one of the top recipients of US foreign aid. Israel is the other. And the reason, so for us, foreign aid is a strategic tool, right? It's very important to keep that in mind. It was one of the first things we instituted when the Cold War started. We thought one way of fighting and maybe even winning the Cold War was through foreign aid. And so the strategic concern has always been part of this. And so Israel and Egypt have been very close, sometimes at, and if not at, then very close to the top of our list. And in large part because of our interest in the Middle East, but also because of the improved relationship between Israel and Egypt since the 1979 peace agreement between them. But if you think about why Israel receives foreign aid when Israel is a highly developed, strong, economy, then you might be asking yourself, why do we do this? And so it's not about helping an economy because they don't need our help, but it's about maintaining a strategic relationship.